One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make starting a business or trying to think like really big on like how to go about this is they are too afraid to ask for help.
You're listening to the Transcendent Farmer podcast with your host, Emily Reno.
Welcome, Transcendent Farmers, to another episode of the Transcendent Farmer podcast. I'm so excited to be introducing today's episode and really just stoked to be back with a voice again. You'll hear maybe it'll cut out a little bit there, not so normal. I had some energy moving through my body here in the last week or so that put our production schedule a little bit off kilter. And I'm actually really excited to share more about that in the next episode that we publish in Spanish because it was directly related to that. So, as an introduction to my interview with Clayton, I just want to have you kind of rewind time, think back to around March of 2025. That was actually when this interview was originally recorded, and how far we have come in the development and normalization of artificial intelligence since that time. We barely scratched the surface of the applications of AI tools in the work that Clayton is doing, but you will hear that he talks about generating projections, data analysis. His comment about being early and learning these tools to keep up with the industry is spot on. And I've definitely observed this in my own experience. It's also true that while there are some people out there who are super gung-ho about AI tools, there's still a ton of people out there who are like, I want to work with a human. And this is your opportunity. Take advantage of this. Learn the tools and then be the interface with your clients. This is what I'm doing, and it's amazing. The kind of thoughtfulness that I can bring to the meetings that I have with the questions I ask, the preparation I can do, and also the follow-up. All of this just supported by lots of different tools and softwares that I've been trying out over the last couple of years. So consider that as an opportunity for you as too. If you've been kind of on the sidelines of thinking about, is this really something I should be spending my time to learn? Yes, it is, because it will make your job a lot easier. And even if it never comes up in conversation with the work that you're doing for your clients, you will be backed by all of these tools that make your job a lot easier and, to be honest, a lot more joyful. That's at least how it's been in my experience. So who is this episode for? Really those who are interested in learning about how the startup investment community could support your business model, especially if you're in the space of hydroponics. Those who are interested in rural economic development or creative business model development, because this definitely goes outside the box in terms of what normal business models look like. And then also understanding more about the mindset or approach that's needed to do well in this space, whether that's as an entrepreneur, whether that's as a farmer, whether that's approaching investors, and anyone who is looking for proof that you can take a 180-degree turn in your trajectory to become a farmer. And it's not as unusual as you think. And Clayton's story is proof of that. So with that, I hope you enjoy today's interview.
I am tuning in from San Miguel de Allende today in central Mexico, and I've got a colleague of mine calling in from Iowa, which is very exciting. Clayton Mooney is co-founder and chief farmer of Clayton Farms, a mission-driven company that builds the world's freshest salads restaurants, where the greens are grown on-site year-round. When Clayton isn't focusing on the mission of providing better food to more people, you can find him competing in ultra trail marathons throughout the United States. So thank you and welcome, Clayton.
I am grateful to be here.
So I think one of the things that I want to kick our conversation off is just by providing a little bit of background information on how you got to where you are today. Because in our first conversation, what I took away is that you've had this really lovely winding path, right, to get to where you're at as the founder and owner of Clayton Farms. So can you walk us through, what has that looked like?
Yes. So my resume definitely doesn't make sense on paper. So I was born and raised in Southeast Iowa on a small family farm, mostly row crops, so corn, beans, and hay. My family farm is still there today. But in 2008, I left the family farm, told myself I would never do anything with agriculture again. So first lesson, never say never. And I moved to Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. I actually ended up dropping out of college, though, to have an entirely different career path than the one I was on at the time, and that was playing poker professionally. So poker took me all over the world, living between Iowa and Ireland. And thankfully, while living in Ireland, I met a lot of poker players turned angel investors in technology startups. And they helped me to think about solving problems through technology. I got really excited about that. Flash forward to 2014, I moved back to Iowa from living in Ireland, jumped headfirst into startups, and I co-founded my first company. And I naturally fall back into the ag and food space because that's what I know. And I started to realize there's a lot of problems out there to solve, whether it's supply chain, getting something directly to consumer, just really, really focusing on food and having better access to food. So I co-founded a solar-powered food dehydrator company called Kinosol. I was co-founder and chief product officer. We built food dehydrators for farmers who were living off their land. And a lot of the work around that company took me abroad, working with partners in Eastern Africa, as an example, in Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, partners in Brazil, so all over the world. And I kept coming back to this question of what does access to better food mean in our own backyard, starting in central Iowa? So years later, I would leave the day-to-day of Kinosol and remained on the board of directors. And then I co-founded Clayton Farms with Dane Poole, who is today is our co-founder and chief engineer. And since day one in 2017, when we started the company, we've been mission-driven, focusing on providing better food to more people. When we started the company, if you would have asked me if we would have fast food restaurants with farms, I would have said no. But we've realized over the years, as we've really focused on the technology piece of the indoor farming, both the hydroponic growing equipment and the software, we are searching for the most efficient business model to get better food to more people. In our case, fresh salads, fresh wraps, fresh smoothies. But first 3 years focused entirely on the technology. Next couple of years, we proved our technology could work in multiple markets by having a home delivery service of raw greens. And flash forward to coming up on a 2-year anniversary for the Clayton Farms Salads Farm Plus restaurants. And I'm pretty excited by this direction because we, again, are fulfilling our mission. And we're 8 years in, and we've stuck with that mission since day one.
That is so impressive and so wild. I just feel like I want to back up to how did you even get into poker? Was that something that you had started as like a young kid, or did that start when you were, I don't know, later in your teenage years? How did you even get into that?
Yeah. So, I grew up in Iowa meat and potato state. My part or my neck of the woods is a food desert today. It was a food desert when I was little. And I look back and it was probably something for the access of just having healthier and more nutritious food. But I ended up having a speech impediment and I couldn't really speak until I was 8. And while growing up, my mind naturally then just worked in numbers. So I always appreciated something with deductive reasoning or statistics. And so by the age of 10, 11, I was like playing blackjack with friends around, friends and family members and cousins around campfires as we do horseback riding throughout the state. And I loved blackjack, and that naturally brought me to other card games. And then I played collectible card games like Magic the Gathering. Met a lot of players who were playing Magic the Gathering on the kind of the pro tour level, who were transitioning over to playing poker, especially online poker. And so I was intrigued at the time, jumped headfirst into it. Should I have dropped out of college to play full time? Living with no regrets, but it was definitely premature at the time. And so my brain just naturally works in numbers, and I love games.
Well, I think that there's something to be said too about this idea of just kind of like taking that leap of faith and recognizing. I think there's a lot of people that are listening that are probably in a situation where they're always asking themselves this question of timing of, like when do I get started? Or maybe they're feeling impatient about starting their farm, for example. They've been working towards purchasing for a long time. And I get the sense that there's a lot of people that maybe have fears around that, or it's like, oh, well, if I go down this path and I'm never going to get back to farming. But I feel like your story is so evident that you can go these different paths and you never necessarily know where that is going to lead to. I feel like the way that I justify a lot in my head all of these international travels that I've had over the last several years is I always tell myself, like, the things that I'm learning right now are preparing me for what is coming, even though I don't know what's coming. And I just have to trust that. And I think it allows me to navigate different situations with just a different level of intention and thoughtfulness about how is it that I'm saving this information. I'm observing what's going on, the experiences that I'm having from this perspective of this is going to help me in my business in the future. And even if you didn't necessarily have that perspective, I'm absolutely certain that what you did when you were in Ireland, there are things that you learned there that you're now putting into practice in your business today.
Yeah, well said. I think you're always, whatever you're working on is compounding, and it's either going the right direction or the wrong direction. And so leaning into your strengths, if I like numbers and it helped with having a career in poker, it came time where, starting companies, it's how can I take that skill set and move it over? And so understanding, I had my own bankroll, I had my own finances, I was self-employed. So if you're starting a business, understanding the bottom line, understanding your margins, I think that was really key. One of the biggest transitions that really helped is since we focused on the technology first and foremost with Clayton Farms, we knew that it was capital intensive. So you have hardware, software, and living organisms. And so from day one, Dana and I put in essentially, our little bit of life savings. And then we knew we had to raise investment. And, playing poker, a lot of variance, ups and downs in the game, that really helped prepare me for pitching investors. Just because 99 out of every 100 investors are going to tell you no, they can't see the vision. They'll pass for whatever reasons. And then you have to take that one out of every 100 investors. They can see the vision. They write that check. They're a partner with you for the long term. And you have to let that momentum keep carrying you forward in building your business.
Absolutely. And I feel like this is one of the pieces about your story that I find most interesting that I think a lot of listeners maybe aren't familiar with is that within the space of agriculture, there's a lot of folks that are focused on just production, right? And like that's where all of their energy is with the land, working with the plants, understanding that side of things. But because of your exposure and interest in kind of leveraging this technology within the space, like you're just getting exposed to a whole other kind of financial system, with investment and these impact funds and the way that people want to see you scaling your work and they want to know what that return on investment is going to look like. And when you first told me about the business that you had created and sort of insights that your co-founder had, I felt like that was really interesting in terms of how is it that you got to the point where you knew that this is an area that you wanted to be working on? So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about that.
Yes. So the genesis of Clayton Farms really started with a question I posed on a blog. So the question was, how do we create access to more reliable food year round or better food for more people? And so Dana, who I had gone to community college with, Dana's background is in plant biology, mechanical engineering. And he reached out to me and said, I've got the answer to your question, and it's indoor farming. And I said, indoor farming, why? And Danon's background brought him to kind of this interesting kind of cross section of looking at the indoor farming industry as a whole. And he said, well, first and foremost, the average indoor farm takes 7 years to turn a profit. That's a really long time. That's why a lot of indoor farms go under. Danon's belief, the reason for this being so long was you kind of choose one of two paths, and both paths end up at the kind of the same point where you could go under. And one path is you go to the coast, you raise a lot of venture capital, and you go like 100% into the technology piece. And doing so, a lot of indoor farms make what we believe is a mistake of too many bells and whistles. So as an example, they want robots running the farm. The robots take too many years to pay for themselves. Therefore, the indoor farm has no path to profitability. On the other path that we see kind of much more local on the Midwestern level is you'll have an indoor farm or a greenhouse, very, very practical ways of growing food. But at the end of the day, the owners say, well, we're just a farmer. We need to turn around and wholesale We need off-taker agreements. We need to sell to distributors, grocery stores. And by wholesaling, they also push back the path to profitability. And the farmer does the most amount of work, ends up with the smallest slice of the pie or the margins. And so that's why we see a lot of indoor farms go under kind of from that path. Dana and my thesis was if you could start with just 1,000 square feet of vacant or antiquated space, and you could grow food directly for consumers, you can improve the supply chain on a hyper local level. You can capture more margin and build a more sustainable business and then have a faster path to profitability. If you could do those three things by serving and actually growing for communities, if it worked in one location, it could work in thousands of locations.
It's so cool. And it's making me think of this Netflix film that I just watched that is like this, sci-fi situation. And there's, robots taking over the world and then robots, fighting robots. And there's this moment where this kind of like post-apocalyptic scene of you're going into this mall that has basically been taken over by robots who've made it their new home. And I feel like there's a lot of those situations where, like, what you're creating, I think there's this really cool moment where a lot of this happened right throughout the pandemic. You just saw a lot of these fast food places go under. And especially in these rural towns, I can't tell you how many places across greater Minnesota I would be driving around, tons of Taco Bells just empty, right? And when you think about the potential of revitalization, I feel like rural places in particular are some of the best opportunities because, either again, to your point, it's like a vacant or underutilized space, or people have just not seen it as a place that's ripe for investment and opportunity. I feel like small towns and rural places are often forgotten about. And like you were saying, a lot of people will go to the coast for all these, investment firms and stuff. But I feel like that's one of the things when I was first looking at your website that I was most excited about was this idea of how is it that you reinvent these spaces and kind of flip this idea of fast food on its head by completely flipping the script in terms of what's actually inside this building that you wouldn't expect. I feel like that's really cool.
Thank you. A lot of statistics kind of came together. And again, back to that kind of compounding, it brought more and more clarity to us. So as an example, if you ask me my number one why behind the scenes of building and being chief farmer at Clayton Farms, it's the statistic that if you walk into a grocery store produce aisle, especially here in the Midwest, all the food sitting on that shelf is missing a third or more of its nutrition and flavor. And that's because it's older than 3 days post-harvest. And it's not the grocer's fault, not the distributor's fault, not the farmer's fault, but because they're segmented and teleportation doesn't exist yet, that leads us to like that's the supply chain that everyone just accepts. And so for us to be able to grow, instead of 1,500 food miles, it's 15 feet for the leafy greens, microgreens, that's been really key for us to get people to have access to like the full flavor of something, then the full nutrition of something. And in order to do that, we really had to get creative on saying like, here's this vacant warehouse. Could we grow a bunch of food in it year round? And then from warehouses leading us into the statistic that we found about the restaurant space, it was the end of 2022. We were brainstorming with some of our investors and mentors about where our technology was and if a better and more sustainable business model existed. And we came across this statistic that showed in 2023, there would be 100,000 restaurants shutting down in the United States. A lot of the restaurants, like you mentioned, the Taco Bells, the more rural communities, it's because the pandemic completely changed the landscape of dine-in with DoorDash, Uber Eats, et cetera. And so we said, okay, if we're in this kind of more modern age and there's standalone, brick and mortar, 2,500 square foot restaurants that the dine-in just wasn't working for them anymore, and they couldn't figure out the distribution side through other partners like DoorDash. Is there a chance for us to come into a location, look at the previous dine-in space and envision and actually start a farm there? And it was pretty wild concept to most people we talked with. But I do feel like from a startup and entrepreneur side, you have to bend reality to your will because, whatever you're working on, if it does work out, it's going to hopefully make the world a better place, and the world will look different from it. So that kind of maybe a little bit delusional side, but walking into a vacant, previously a Fazoli's Italian restaurant and looking around with the smell of breadsticks still in the air. And I say, oh, yeah, this is going to be a farm and we're going to serve the world's freshest salads from it.
So cool. And I feel like for some people, it would be like an interior designer's dream. Like, what a cool
Absolutely.
niche, within that space of like, we renovate old buildings and we figure out how to make them food production sites. I mean, I just think that's so neat. And I feel like when it comes to the business model, there's a really important concept that's coming out of this for me, which is this idea of vertical integration. I think that it's thrown around as a term a lot of times, but maybe farmers and listeners may not necessarily understand. And so I'm wondering if you can explain, like, what is vertical integration? How is it relevant for what you're doing? And maybe why should farmers be thinking about that in terms of their own food business endeavors?
Yes. So, from an agricultural or food side, I really see vertical integration as wanting to own the supply chain. And you may be thinking, upfront, that's a big investment. And maybe that's not doable now. And that's okay as long as you're thinking, again, long term and back to that compounding side. So when we started the business, now we're 8 years old. I still feel like it's day one. I feel like for the next couple of decades, we'll be, building the business up. When we knew that we were onto something with the technology piece, then that allowed us to start testing different business models. And for us, and kind of the raw definition of a startup to me is you are working on a technology that's searching for a repeatable, scalable business model. And so since we had this indoor farming technology figured out 1,000 square foot at a time, was really happy with our unit economics or how much food we could produce per square foot, that allowed us to then experiment. So we had, one model we tested was people could rent the growing equipment from us. So you can maybe have a community run CSA style. You could grow, one of 200 plus foods in our systems. The next model that we really focused on for almost 3 years was the home delivery service. And when it came time for us to do that, we said, okay, right at the beginning of the pandemic, this was early 2020. People don't feel comfortable going to the grocery store. How can we provide a good product and a good service to them that then also brings the feeling of a year-round farmer's market? And so in order to find these individuals as customers, we started advertising on social media. We started putting out kind of email blasts to the community. We drew a 30-mile radius around our farm in Ames. And we said, if you live within this radius, we'll harvest and deliver to you to your doorstep year round. You can sign up for weekly or every other week delivery. That allowed us to kind of take the next step in that vertical integration because we went from just being a farm with our own growing technology to then also the fulfillment side. And so the first 3,000 of the 30,000 plus deliveries we did, Dana and I did ourselves because we wanted to be front and center, face to face with that customer to hear their feedback, especially with our customers. I'm obsessed with customers and who they are. And so our customers at the time for the home delivery service was early to mid 60s female, top 1/4 income earner, usually just getting ready to retire or right around there. Loved farmers markets, loves to support local. If we're the farmer down the street, that makes it easier to have that conversation. And so as doing those deliveries, we called it owning the supply chain from seed to delivery. And we had to make some investments to kind of that infrastructure on the delivery side because eventually we brought in contracted drivers. And flash forward to the Farm Plus restaurant or the Clayton Farms salads brand, we've realized we want to own the supply chain from seed to salad. And so starting with growing a food on site and then having it finished up in a full product, full menu, which by the way, our entire menu comes from customer feedback and customers voting on it. So trying to make it a win-win. It's caused us to make some investments, again, in the infrastructure, like better inventory tracking, because we have over 150 SKUs that go into our menu items. But as we've made those investments along the way, we've had to learn things the hard way. But as we make an investment and it starts to pay for itself, then we can look 2 or 3 years out and realize that the investment in the work we're doing now, again, compounding, by the time we get to this stage, we're going to have more of an assured supply from our vertical integration. And I think that's really important when it comes to supply chain because behind the scenes, it is way more brittle than almost anybody would like to admit. And if we can grow the base of any one of our menu items right on site year round, that investment, I think, will pay for itself kind of every year going forward.
If learning more about the applications of artificial intelligence for your farm or food business or securing money is something that you'd like to learn more about, I'm lining up a series of opportunities to engage with me in real life while I'm in Minnesota and North Dakota this summer and fall. I will be sharing more as those dates and times and locations are finalized via my newsletter, which just switched over to Substack, by the way. A quick note on that: if you subscribed in the last 7 months, it's likely that our system didn't capture your contact information, as there was a glitch in the back end of our system and we only just caught it. So if that sounds like you, get your butt over to mezclada.co, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and sign up for the newsletter to stay informed. My apologies for the inconvenience, and thank you for continuing to be a part of this amazing, growing community. So, sneak peek of what is in the works. I have a 2-hour workshop and community building event lined up with the Minnesota Women in AI group based in the Twin Cities. That's going to be focused on grant identification and application writing using AI tools. I've got an event in the works in Fargo-Moorhead in partnership with the North Dakota Women's Business Center. We are still finalizing those details. Another one is a Mezclada sponsored social hour at Brewhala in Fargo. Again, just an opportunity to get everybody together that's been following along this work. Maybe you've engaged with me in the past. Maybe you've been a student in one of my beta courses and you just want to meet other cool people. I highly recommend you attend because really cool people always end up showing up. And then I will be doing the same thing when I am in the cities, a Mezclada sponsored social hour at a brewery or a cidery. I'm actually really excited about the prospect of going to a cidery because that's just not part of the culture here in northern Mexico, and I miss it. Lastly, I am going to be making available a limited number of slots for people to sit down with me one-on-one for what I'm calling a power hour consultation. If you're looking for a wellness consultation, if you need help outlining funding opportunities for your project, or you're trying to start your own business, maybe you're trying to pursue the life of a digital nomad, I will have a limited number of these open, and these will require paying in advance to reserve your spot to make sure that I allocate that time for you and that nobody else can take it. So again, to get information on the details of that, sign up for the newsletter. We will also include a link to that in the show notes for today's episode so that you can stay informed and join us.
You said some things in that I think are really interesting that I want to dig into a little bit. The first thing that's coming to mind is understanding, like, how long would you have to go to measure information or gather insights from one of these things that you were testing out before you decided that you needed to switch to something else? Because I have a feeling there are people that would be curious, like, how long do you go before you know, like, yeah, clearly this is something that isn't working for us? Is it clearly a financial thing? Are there other like metrics that you are looking at to decide, yes, this is something worth continuing to pursue, or we need to pivot and go in a different direction?
Good question. So since we focused on the technology kind of first and foremost, we had the hardware and software. So we didn't want to reinvent the wheel of kind of these sprints for feedback and iteration. And so we stuck with mostly 1 week and 2 week sprints. And so it was very, very quick turnaround times, especially since we have raised venture capital. I think it's really important to try to apply some software standards. And so like people out there building a software as a service company, of course, they can move faster than a physical product company, but there's a lot of really good foundational kind of framework to think through. And so when the pandemic hit and we did the home delivery service, I mean, that was a 1 week sprint to go from a really technology sounding website to a consumer facing sign up for home delivery of greens. And we told ourselves once it was up and going, like our very first day of deliveries, there were 11 deliveries. We knew half the people. But we told ourselves that 2 weeks from then, when we had essentially at the time our next large harvest, we had to make sure that production started to line up with demand. We didn't want waste from the farm for various reasons. And then on the other side, if a customer signed up, we wanted to be able to fulfill their entire order. And so that led us to really honing in on the data. And this was, way back, 4 or 5 years ago. I would say AI tooling wasn't even close to what it is today. So, as an example, we were using artificial intelligence to understand and take photos of our food on our lettuce growing to understand, the health levels of it, if it was on track to get to the yield we needed, et cetera. But flash forward to today, I think someone wanting to get started, taking some of your spreadsheets that you build out around whether it's the finances or maybe production schedule, uploading that into something like ChatGPT and walking through and asking it to analyze and understand like how you can reduce number of steps. That's a big one I'm always thinking about is, well, if somebody told me it's this complicated, how can I break it down to kind of a first principles thinking, or what's the absolute necessities, what are the options or the opinions? But ChatGPT and other AI tools are incredible for that today. They can build, of course, entire projections, business plans. I think that's really important for us, especially in this day and age, to think about everything as kind of a tool and not be afraid to use it, especially because the value of information is getting cheaper and cheaper every day.
Absolutely. Such a good point. And I think that's something I try to emphasize a lot with farmers that I work with. And I just had a conversation with someone earlier this week about that is in the same way that we think about debt, for example, there's a lot of people who will assign a value of, oh, this is good or bad. But then there's a whole other perspective of debt as a tool, right? To sort of get closer towards your goals. And I think a lot of times with some of these advanced technologies, people are doing the same thing. And I totally understand where they're coming from. And I think that their perspectives are valid and should be noted that there is a dark side to these technologies. Like, I'm not going to say that there isn't. But I think that the quicker that we can get to one, I'm going to use this more intentionally and keep that in the back of my mind of, yes, I recognize that there are inherent risks associated with using this technology. And two, I'm going to bring that intention to the way that I'm using it and not assign a value of like good or bad. I feel like people are going to be in a much better place when they start kind of leveraging those things for them.
Yeah, and so I'm a giant science fiction nerd. Growing up reading comic books, etc. And I heard this quote once that ever since I heard it, it just stuck with me. And it is the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And every time I've been in this conversation where somebody else, like let's say it's pitching an investor, and and I tell them this big vision for all of these urban farms, and they tell me like I just can't see it. To me, it's inevitable. To them, it's not. And I understand and I can respect every viewpoint. Obviously, I'm betting my entire life and career on this approach. But if you believe that quote is the majority of it's true, then the question is, do you want to give yourself a handicap in not utilizing it as a tool? And especially when you can remove emotion from it. And so a couple years from now, if 80% of law firms out there are utilizing AI tools and assistants, that becomes the norm. And those who choose not to use it will fall behind. And I think us being in the food space and there's more food deserts than ever before, as an example, trying to address food deserts by eventually launching Farm Plus restaurants in every single location we can. If I were not wanting to embrace the tools and experiment with the tools as well, I think we would already be falling behind. And if we fall behind, then we fall behind on our mission. The business goes under and we don't get to solve some really, really big problem.
Indeed. A lot of listeners of this podcast, they are based in rural places, but they don't necessarily feel like there's opportunity in some of these small towns to either make a decent living or do so while they're engaging in work that's actually fulfilling to them. And I know this from personal experiences of having worked with lots of people who've said that to me. They feel like in order to reach their goals, they're going to have to compromise. And just to give you a sense, for people that aren't familiar with Ames population in 2023 was about 65,000. And so I'm curious to know, what would you tell someone else that wants to try something new, but they're living in a smaller town or city?
Yeah, so come from Blakesburg, Iowa, a town of about 300 people. And again, it blew my mind when I left the family farm and I said, okay, now I'm going off to the big cities. And I went from Ames to Denver, Denver to Dublin. And in my mind, I assumed, and again, not good on me for just to assume, but I assumed that food deserts would be a thing of the past by the time I got 10 years older. Flash forward to since there are literally more than ever before, I think some of the best opportunities out there to fix something and improve something starts in the rural communities. The good news from post kind of pandemic exceptions is a lot of people have access to work remotely now. And I think, like, I would encourage people to think somewhat selfishly and just say, hey, if I'm in a rural town and the cost of living here is pretty low compared to the larger areas, could you go out and get a job that pays way above average from, let's say, some coastal company out there? And can you learn and continue to build out your skill set? Uh, to me, that's totally fair. And again, it kind of goes back to that tool. If you utilize the remote work as a tool, you probably have more options out there. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make starting a business or trying to think like really big on like how to go about this is they are too afraid to ask for help. And I have had mentors all of my life at every stage, and I don't know what it is about me, but if I feel like I'm too dumb for something, then like I'm wanting to ask because I obsess over trying to understand it more. And those mentors, like the best thing a mentor can do is tell you what you need to hear when you need to hear it. The second best thing is they can make their Rolodex your Rolodex and bring their network to you. But asking for help, whether that's on like jumping on some online forums or online chats in different groups like on Discord or Slack, there's almost kind of a niche for everybody out there interested in different things, and not afraid to ask those questions. Essentially, you're getting to borrow the wisdom from somebody else, and that's why like I write a blog today that's focused on building a company, and my entire mission for the blog is to save people time, money, or heartache, just by like, hey, here's a really a dumb way that I went about something. Please read this, learn from it, and save yourself some time.
Absolutely. And I 100% agree. I think we live in such a cool moment in history where, based on your unique interest, you can almost always find some community in digital space that is also nerding out about that thing. And I was just writing about that this morning, actually. I was making a list of all of the digital communities that I have been involved in over the years. And when I started to take stock of that, I was just like, holy cow, this is absurd. And I also feel like it is one of the few things that has helped me feel grounded and connected as I've traveled from one country to another over the last 14 months or so. And so, yes, I think that it's a really cool time to also be living in rural places, because even if you aren't necessarily feeling very connected in person to your immediate community, you can always seek further connections in digital space that can help you feel that sense of community.
Amen. Yeah, and I like the idea of I should create that list too of all the different communities you belong to. Again, kind of back to that compounding theme. Maybe you made one connection in one and 10 in the other, but looking back, it all helps shape your resources.
Yes. So speaking of this idea of dreaming, right, and visions, I would love to know, what does your pie in the sky vision look like for Clayton Farms? Where do you want this business to be 5, 10 years from now?
Yes. So I think the best way we scale and launch other locations to help other communities from a hyper local level is through franchising. So as we think about Iowa and the surrounding states, we are interested in more company-owned locations, but we've already started the process in finding owner-operators in other locations who would be proud to call themselves the chief farmer of their location and truly partner with us for 5, 10, 15 years at a time. And so back to kind of my science fiction nerding out, I had a mentor ask me, what would be a very profound thing that you'd be proud of to have on your tombstone? So I thought about it for a while and I came back with, numbers, science fiction with real data from today. So today, the average American loses 2 to 5 years off of their life from eating fast food. I don't think that I can help break people's habits of eating fast food. So the solution is healthy fast food. And I think there will come a point in time where we have enough locations. It might be 1,000, it might be 2,000, where about 10% of the population in the US is a customer of ours. So that's about 35 million people. On the low end, if we gave those 35 million people an average of 2 years of their life back by eating healthy fast food, then that's 70 million years contributed back to humanity. I think that'd be pretty good to have on a tombstone. But I know that's a very science fiction answer.
I don't think that's science fiction. I think that's real, and you can totally make it
Thank you.
happen.
It might take a couple more decades, but I'm in it for the long haul.
Yes. You know, and it's one of those things that I think it's sort of like that idea of you shoot for the moon, right? And even if you get halfway, that's still further than you would have if you had set your goal smaller. So I love that.
Right.
I'm curious to know, what do you feel is one of the biggest barriers that is keeping you from getting closer to that goal?
Ooh, yeah. I live in a constant state of paranoia. I think I have this kind of quote that only the paranoid survive, only the delusional thrive. And as we think about the future that we want to shape and we want to launch more of, this concept, you launch it anywhere and people will ask, what is going on? Like, is this a farm plus a fast food restaurant? And I think the timing needs to be there. So if we were too late, which we're definitely not on that side of the spectrum with it, if we were too late, we might have missed our chance to jump into really good markets. If you're too early, you have to kind of suffer through the years and years before it catches on and the adoption is there. If you're right on target, you'll only know when you're looking back. And so I hope that that's our result there. But that's definitely one of the things that keep me up at night is making sure we are being data driven with our decisions into new markets to go into, whether it's company owned or finding partners in those markets. That's really going to be key because I want every location to be the best version or the newest, best iteration. And so right now, if I launched a Clayton Farms salads in my neck of the woods in Southeast Iowa, I know it would not do well. We need to continue to build up the brand. We need to take profits from stronger markets and then put it into some of the other markets to help subsidize. And that just takes time. And if you're an impatient entrepreneur like I am, some days you wanted everything done yesterday. But the long-term approach, now that we're 8 years in as a company, like I've never been more excited about the next 10 years. Every year that's gone by, there's just more and more clarity. There's more and more, cut through the noise. And that's helped us from raising investment to listening to customers on various subjects around, food and service to even hiring and recruiting for team members. That's another one that I know keeps a lot of my friends who are fellow entrepreneurs and founders up at night is finding the right team members. And the more clarity you can have with someone, the more that they can kind of opt in or opt out more efficiently or quickly. And I think that's really, really important. And clarity is something that we could all utilize and use more of.
Absolutely. And I think that context is everything. I feel like you really hit the nail on the head with that one. And I think this is a theme that I've heard among a lot of entrepreneurs who I would consider successful is they always have their eyes peeled. They're always looking for opportunity. They're paying attention to what's happening in the market. They're always listening and they're not afraid to shift gears and go in a different direction if they see a clear need that can be filled. And I feel like that's something that I observe in the way that you're approaching these things as well, and that will continue to serve you well as you continue down this path.
Much appreciated. That importance around noticing something and changing directions if you need to. That's something too that I think it's kind of ingrained in a lot of our systems to failure is bad. But as an entrepreneur, it's happening every day, and you have to understand at what level of failure you are okay with. And if you can embrace that more, that allows you to experiment more. And for me, even though I try to make every decision to be data driven, there's many decisions that you just don't have the data. You have to take that leap of faith, build the parachute on the way down approach. But if you can just accept that failure is an experiment, and the more you experiment, the more likely you are to actually succeed. That's a much healthier mindset, especially for someone out there wanting to build their own business.
Yes, life as this living laboratory is so much more fun. So one of the questions that I like to end our interviews with, because you are on the Transcendent Farmer podcast, is what does it mean to you to be a transcendent farmer?
Yes. So I would love to leave the world better off than when I started in it. And I think technology, if utilized the right way, gives us the best opportunity to truly fulfill a mission of providing better food to more people.
I love it. And I know that there's going to be so many people that are inspired by this conversation. They're going to want to learn more about you and Clayton Farms. So, where would you send them to get more information?
Yes. So my email, I'll happily make public. My email is just the letter C at claytonfarms.com. Please reach out if we can help in any way. We've also open sourced all of our technology. So happy to walk you through if you're interested in indoor farming specifically. You can also find us at claytonfarms.com or my personal website at claytonmooney.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Clayton, for your time and everything that you are doing. I'm so excited to follow you in your journey and see how this grows. And who knows, maybe you'll extend internationally and we'll find, Clayton Farm salad franchises here in central Mexico.
Absolutely. Everywhere could improve food. We're excited.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening to another episode, and we will catch you on the other side.